Todd Hido is an American photographer best known for his atmospheric photos of homes at night. He takes conventionally mundane subjects, such as suburban houses, and makes them drip with ambiguous atmosphere. His images simultaneously convey loneliness and comfort, tension and nostalgia. Today we're going to try and recreate this look. Todd Hido was born and raised in Kent, Ohio. Much of the inspiration for his photographs comes from places that remind him of where he grew up. His photos have that sort of sleepy, small-town feel of the American Midwest, even though many were taken in California. One of his major influences was the American writer Raymond Carver, whose short stories have been adapted into theater and film.
We all should be ashamed when we talk like we know what we're talking about when we talk about love.
Oh, for God's sake, are you getting drunk?
Carver's work is centered on the working class, exploring themes of suburban disenchantment, failing marriages, and alcoholism. He has a very terse and colloquial writing style. There's no frilly metaphors or long internal monologues that you'd find in other writers like Dostoevsky. He doesn't really describe the inner thoughts of his characters, so you often have to infer meaning and subtext from the scene. Some of Carver's books feature Todd Hido's photographs on the cover, and that's not a coincidence. In a similar vein, Todd Hido's photographs don't force a narrative. Instead, they suggest certain themes in a very subtle way.
And I was definitely at a point in my life where I was thinking about relationships and family and home and things like that. And this picture struck me because I wondered very much, why were these two people, watching television with the lights off, on their TV screens in their bedrooms, but they weren't together, and I find that to be quite, sort of curious. It makes me wonder about the people inside and what their relationship might be like. And then, or images like this, where just like, what's going on inside of that house? You can never see anything in my work. It's not something that you can never see anything through a window ever. It's just sort of like that implied presence of people. And I really do believe that meaning of artwork resides in the viewer. And so I make pictures that obviously mean something to me, but they also mean something on a larger scale to other people, which I think is fascinating.
Let's look at some of the parameters that Hido's Homes at Night series works with. The subject is often a modest suburban house, and specifically a house with only a few of its windows lit. There are never any people in his shots, but there is always an implied human presence. Lit windows, parked cars. Lighting. The photos are taken at night with street lamps and house lights as the only light sources. He often shoots in foggy or wintry conditions, which creates a sense of isolation, but also adds more ambient light. Fog scatters light, while snow on the ground reflects it. Composition-wise, we have a lot of eye-level shots with little to no distortion. Vertical lines are kept parallel, which gives it more of an impassive documentarian feel. The horizontals, however, are often angled, giving his images depth. Driveways, crossways, and electric poles serve as leading lines to amplify this effect. Todd Hido used a Pentax 6x7 camera for this series, Kodak Portra 400 NC film, and the tripod. I'm not sure which exact lens he used, but the perspective in his images suggests a focal length in the normal to short telephoto range. I'll be using my Nikon APS-C DSLR, a tripod, and two prime lenses with full frame equivalent focal lengths of 50 and 75mm. When it comes to camera settings, the aperture is small because both background and foreground are in focus. I'll be using f8 for my photos. ISO seems to be pretty low. There's not much grain on his images, and the film he used was 400 ISO. However, keep in mind he shot in medium format, and the larger negative helps reduce the prominence of grain. Because I'm using a smaller APS-C sensor, I'm going to be setting ISO to a lower value of 100 to compensate. To make up for the small aperture and low ISO, the shutter speed has to be slow, and in Hido's case, it was up to several minutes. I won't need that much time on my camera because I'm not shooting on film, so I'll be using a maximum of 30 seconds for my exposures. I'll be using a tripod for this, naturally. Now, if you've ever used a tripod around other people, you know they're often seen as suspicious. But that suspicion is misplaced. Todd Hido is not doing anything illegal, at least by North American standards. He's just doing a one-off picture of a house from across the street. It's the same kind of photo that's visible on Google Street View. That being said, a person's home is their most prized possession, so there are a few things you can do to minimize causing any distress. And here's how Todd Hido deals with it.
I kind of turned the camera around and then shot back that way. And then what's kind of curious about this is that I remember so clearly, as soon as I turned my attention to that house, the people in the house with that light on up there, they noticed me, you know, and it wasn't that they were looking at me, but they could feel me there, you know, looking at it. And it's kind of it's been something I've been dodging for a long time, is like when I take a picture, you know, instead of looking at the people's house, like I look like over this way. Because my energy is pointing somewhere else, you know, because otherwise they'll spot me right away.
In other words, you need some misdirection. It might be useful to pick a place that has several objects of interest, apart from the houses, because after you press your shutter and wait for the long exposure to complete, you can walk around and face those directions to give the impression that you're photographing them instead. In my case, I chose an open field across the street from several houses. It has a picturesque walking path, several trees and transmission towers, so if anybody does see me, I could just as well be photographing these objects instead. So with all these parameters in mind, I waited for a foggy day. Soon enough, in March, it happened. Freezing fog. And this is what it looked like.
We also have some fog patches, so we're still under a fog advisory here in Toronto. Be careful as you're heading your way out.
Expect chilly conditions tonight, near freezing. We're going to see some patchy fog out there, probably some frost, and with that fog we might have some freezing fog, which could make some of the roads just a little slick tomorrow.
So that was my attempt to imitate Todd Hido's most famous work, Homes at Night. Even though his pictures were published decades ago, they still have a timeless ability to resonate with viewers, and considering the isolation that many people have experienced while staying home in the past 2 years, his work is being discovered and appreciated by more and more people. As always, let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you on the next one.